So the Zelda series has been around for almost 40 years. Next year, 2026, is going to mark the 40-year anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series because the first game came out on the NES back in 1986. And since then, it's obviously become one of Nintendo's most profitable IPs ever. And it's one of those things where it's astounding with how far the series has come and how much it's evolved since its inception back in the mid 80s. And as far as games are concerned, I think there's been more than like 45 or 46 Zelda games, like total, including spin-offs. I think there's been like 21, main entry video games. And I feel like the Zelda series is one of those IPs that's only gotten better with time. It seems like with each generation that passes, it seemed like the games get better for the most part. The graphics, the visuals, the storytelling, all that stuff. And there's also like a couple of games from the past that stood the test of time quite well. I'm talking about games like Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, Link Awakening, Twilight Princess. A lot of people feel like those games have stood the test of time, but what's really astounding about the Zelda series is the fact that the protagonist Link is a silent protagonist, and I don't know. It seems like for the most part, Link has remained the same. There hasn't really been any like deep character development with Link or anything like that. And he's one of those characters that doesn't have like a personality or anything like that. But at the same time, it's like he has like this larger than life presence that symbolizes heroism, and it's something that a lot of people look at and they're astounded by. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Maybe it's like, aside from what I just mentioned, maybe it's the way Nintendo markets the Zelda series. Maybe it's the storytelling. Maybe it's the open world environments and the level designs and all that stuff that makes The Legend of Zelda something that's still highly relevant in the world of gaming today. Because you gotta like remember, like, Zelda is it started off as like an action adventure, type of video game in the 8-bit era. And and honestly, it's something that, like, at the time, a lot of people never would have guessed that it would have blew up and it would have um became like one of the biggest like franchises in video game history, because I don't know, like, a lot of people feel like Link as a character is just boring, but at the same time, I think that's what a lot of people like about the Zelda series, the fact that the character is one that's that of a traditional hero, and that Nintendo is able to market the series in a way where they don't really have to develop the character at all to try and connect with casuals. And I feel like the same has been done with Mario as well, because even though, like, with Mario, he has a couple of like I wouldn't even say like catchphrases, but a couple of sayings like "Here we go" and "So long, Gay Bowser" and stuff like that. It's like Mario didn't need any like deep evolution or anything like that as a character to connect with casuals. I feel like I don't know. I feel like the Mario games and the story that Nintendo was trying to tell with Mario was enough to a point where people, saw it and they were just entertained by it, and as a result, it ended up making millions and millions of dollars for the franchise. And Mario and the Zelda series are two of the most profitable IPs and franchises in video game history. So obviously, like, Nintendo is doing something right in relation to, I guess, keeping their protagonists relevant and basically doing like the bare minimum for the most part and making as much of a profit off of the respective IPs as they possibly can. But with that being said, I wouldn't say that Link is necessarily a boring character or anything like that, because I feel like Link being a silent protagonist is something that allow players to kind of like fill in the void with I guess what they would expect Link to have in terms of personality. And the fact that, Link is one of those characters that can deal with adversity and trials and injustice and all that stuff, but then at the same time, he doesn't become corrupted or anything like that. And that's something that, you don't see nowadays in video games, because nowadays when it comes to video games, a lot of protagonists are either anti-heroes or just bland, heroes that nobody really cares about, or the game is just a copy of something else and it's just boring. I just feel like a lot of like modern day video games, they don't really draw heavy inspiration from classics like Zelda or Mario or anything like that. Nobody really cares. I feel like a lot of modern day games draw inspiration from action adventure titles or RPGs or whatever. It just feels like copies of something else, and nobody really cares. And after about a year, if it's released, nobody remembers it or what have you. And yeah, the landscape of gaming has changed significantly since the 80s or 90s, because you don't see a lot of video game companies trying to create mascots or characters or anything like that to try and connect with casuals. But people think significantly different nowadays compared to like the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s. And because of that, I feel like we don't have like any larger than life characters nowadays. And the thing is, while people think, Link is probably boring as a character, at least he's a character, and at least, he connects with a lot of people. I mean, Link has been a silent protagonist for damn near 40 years. And honestly, he's a character who's basically in a franchise that doesn't even have his name on it. I mean, the IP and the franchise is named after the princess that he's trying to rescue, and she didn't get like her own real game until like, I guess, like this past year. And I think that might be like a spinoff. And and I think it's one of those things where I don't think Link necessarily needs a character or a personality to really connect with people, but we're supposed to be getting a Legend of Zelda movie sometime in the future. And if that's the case, how would Hollywood handle that on the big screen? Is it something they can pull off? Because if you try to give Link a personality and a character similar to what was done back in the late 80s when they did the Zelda cartoon, it's most likely going to be really bad, or it's going to be a massive flop, because I believe that particular anime series only lasted a season, and then it basically was dropped, and then you didn't get any anime or television shows or movies regarding the Zelda series since then. But I feel like the Zelda series is like 10 times bigger than what it was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I feel like having a animated series or a movie on the big screen would actually be something that would draw in millions in terms of revenue, if handled correctly, if it stayed true to, I guess, the video game origins. And I guess it tried to like, connect with casuals, or it's done in a way where people understand what's going on. But I don't know, I'm not exactly sure, whether or not I'm not sure whether or not, Zelda, the series being, like on the big screen or on television necessarily a good idea, because I feel like Link being a silent protagonist is something that kind of it helps the mystique of his character, and I feel like it's one of those things where if you try to stray too far away from it, it could be something that can, make or break, the Zelda series. And I feel like if we get like a bad, Zelda film, then obviously it's going to have a negative effect on the IP as a whole. But I feel like I don't know. I feel like, regardless of how good or how bad it might be, I still feel like a lot of people would go and check it out. And I still feel like it would be better than the animated series that we got back in like 1989. But But yeah, I mean, I don't feel like, for the most part, Link is like a boring character or anything like that. I don't think people really look so much at the character. They just look at the story and they look at the timelines and they look at the fact that you have different versions of Link in different timelines. So it's not necessarily the same character. And I feel like the whole thing with like time travel and Ocarina of Time and the different timelines involving different versions of Link, I feel like that is intriguing enough to a point where people wouldn't focus so much on the character, but they focus more on what's going on with like Hyrule, and they focus more on like what's going on with Ganon and all that other stuff. I honestly feel that I feel like the Zelda series is just fine the way that it is. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with, Zelda always being a damsel in distress in every, mainline game or anything like that. But obviously, it's worked for Nintendo long enough to a point where it's still one of the biggest, attractions, within the gaming industry. And it's one of those things where if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. So even if like people think Link is a boring character, um, it's just like I feel like it's probably gonna just be a minority, like a vocal minority of people who feel that way. I feel like a majority of people or a majority of Nintendo or Zelda fans feel like there's nothing wrong with Link, there's nothing wrong with the stories or anything like that. As long as Nintendo comes out with good stuff, whether it be sequels or whether it be prequels to sequels or what have you, as long as it's something that can capture people's attention, there's really nothing wrong with the Legend of Zelda series, and I don't think Nintendo should do anything to try and like change Link for what he is right now, because the way he is right now, it's perfect. He's an old school traditional hero that doesn't say anything. He deals with a lot of crap. He takes it and basically, he fights evil. So, it's pretty much, black and white, for the most part, good versus evil. And you don't see that type of dynamic nowadays in a lot of video games. There's always like shades of gray and anti heroes and stuff like that. And I feel like, that's one of the things that's unique about the Zelda series is the fact that, it's basically the same as it was back in the mid 80s and the early 90s and stuff like that, but different with different storylines and all that other stuff. And I honestly feel like that's something that should not change, because I feel like that being, the same way that it was, back in the day and staying constant is something that adds to its appeal, because I feel like with the Zelda series, it's something that a lot of video game developers are not really trying to duplicate, and the indie game developers who do try to duplicate the Legend of Zelda formula, they don't have the level of success that this franchise has had, or I don't think it'll ever have the level of success that this franchise will ever have. I don't think any indie game developer or any other video game company will have the level of success that Super Mario Brothers have, because things are different. Mario became a huge attraction back when platformers were a thing, and I feel like Zelda became a huge attraction back when action adventures were like massive attractions. I mean, action adventure genre is still an attraction in this day and age, but that's mainly with like games that are like M or T rated or what have you. Um, yeah, I think like for the most part, Link, the way that he is, there's nothing wrong with him at all. I don't think he's necessarily boring. He may not be everyone's cup of tea, but at the same time, I do feel that he's a big enough name to a point where he doesn't need to have a character to be a huge attraction. And obviously, we have seen that, over time, especially with the past two major games that came out. We got Tears of the Kingdom, which came out back in 2023, and that sold over 21 million. And then you had Breath of the Wild, which came out back in 2017, that sold over 33 million. So obviously, the Zelda series has aged like fine wine, and trying to like change anything or trying to give Link, any type of personality is something that can be detrimental to his overall character and it can backfire in Nintendo's face. So, yeah, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with Link as a character. And yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how he's going to be handled in the Legend of Zelda film, but yeah, it's one of those deals where if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. And I feel like that's definitely the case with Link as a silent protagonist.